Can you really do something? This is definitely not it.
Oh,
Okay.
Funny if it was like just the outline of the, like the side of the
what's going on?
You sure? Yeah, I can join in. You are here. Oh, this is one of your students. Oh, you know her. I'm staying here then.
There's two ladies that are sitting there already. Just so
Y'all should come in here, dude. Come and sit down.
Wow. I do. Thank you. Having had. Good afternoon. Everybody here? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to The Current. My name is Royann Dean, and I will be the moderator for our discussion this evening. Today, we are speaking with Angelika Wallace Whitfield and Jason Bennett. And they are the artists who are currently featured in a show, which is up now in Echo, called True Grit. Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so we're gonna have just a very interesting and cool discussion today. So we'll talk for a little bit, and if you have questions, then we can just take your questions. So we're gonna keep it very organic. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and just let's have a super interesting conversation. We have two very interesting and inspiring artists. So ready?
Yeah.
So your show is called True Grit. Why is it called True Grit? It's kind of an interesting name.
Well, I feel like the awesome current team sort of came up with that one. But I feel like it applies to the work really well. Good curatorial decision. I feel like material-wise, the work is gritty, and it's also true. Very authentic work, I feel like, from both of us. Do you have anything to add to that?
Can you all hear me like this?
Yeah. So we'd love to hear you. We'd love to hear you through the mic.
So, also with that, speaking with Avery, in regards to the True Grit, the idea of both of our styles, totally different subject matter, but looking like very urban, kind of Angelika's use of spray paint, sometimes I use spray paint. The runs, just kind of the washed out kind of smoky textures throughout all of the pieces. And I think that had a lot to do, but that was just based on physical appearance of the work, not so much, the subject matter at that point. I think we ironically find out that our work does have, or deals with, perseverance and ideas of, with his family, in my case, just kind of dealing with homeless people. So I think it really showed out, at the end for the subject matter, not just the physicality of it.
So it's a combination basically of the subject matter and the kind of physicality of the work that lends itself to the theme or the name True Grit. So you mentioned that your work is similar in some ways, but the actual work itself is showing in the show, like they're very different. They are similar in that they are very textured and there's a layered process to each of your work respectively. How do you think that process played into what you produced for the show? I mean, were you thinking along those lines? I know you said the current team came up with the name, but were you thinking along those lines when you were producing the work?
I think for me, yes, our styles are very different. Jason does a lot of more abstract work. I do a lot of figurative work, leaning a lot on old family archives. All of the work features members of my family. But within the show, we've done 8 collaborative pieces that we both worked on at the same time in the studio. And I think during that process, it was sort of like the ribbon that tied it all together. And I think something I learned, although our work's subject matter is very different, we apply paint in a very similar way, and it's very loose, it's very gestural, it's sort of like where the paint lands is where it stays, but it doesn't have to stay. We're constantly working and reworking the pieces. So I feel like, I don't know, just to comment on that whole, like, our works look different, I feel like the essence of them is very much the same. I don't know if you have
They're coming from a gritty place.
Yeah, gritty place, for sure.
I think in my case, the process didn't change, but I actually altered my subject matter to a point to accommodate the theme of True Grit. Normally, all of my work is strictly based on nature and observations of that, processes of erosion, build up over time. But in this case, I started using symbolism, with the shopping cart to deal with, True Grit as far as humanity, the problems that I've been seeing and dealing with that.
So since you mentioned the shopping cart, I did have a question about that because it is kind of a recurring theme. It's the narrative throughout your work in the show. What does that symbolize effectively for you? So
for me specifically, homelessness is everyone's got the shopping cart. Where we live up in Seattle. And it's prevalent, and it's insane when you see it. I think that's also the reason someone said, like, the shopping cart's in every one of the pictures. Well, that's how it is. You're seeing this every single day, everywhere you look. But it was the duality of it. For me, the shopping cart means I'm going to go have a good time, specifically. I'm going to the store, we're gonna get all the beer, we're gonna get the steaks, and we're going out camping, and I guarantee to make good memories. And it was just contrasting that with seeing the same cart everywhere with someone having memories thrust upon them. So just kind of introducing that into my normal practice of just looking at my side of things, which is all just nature stuff.
I think it's interesting with the concept of the shopping cart, because when I think of a shopping cart, I mean, I'm thinking about going to the food store, you're correct, but I think maybe because I pass Pot Cake every day. Does everybody know who Pot Cake is? Yeah. I pass Pot Cake every day, and he has the shopping cart with this kind of collection of hubcaps on it, which is his own. It's almost like his house, right? He's storing these things there, and I think it's interesting this idea of this concept, because while you're having a very transient experience with the cart, going to the store and getting things, but that's a means by which you're carrying things to get to someplace else. But homeless people are using that as two things, right? It's a means of travel, but it's also kind of all their belongings in the sense that you call something your home, which I think is interesting. And Angelika, your work involves a lot of kind of your memories.
Yeah, it does. A lot of them are sort of collages memories. So I've used like photographs for reference, but in some cases, using photographs sort of as a more separated reference where I'm just looking at sort of the way my mom looked in '97 and sort of the photos that exist correcting the memories I have, but I'm painting the memories that exist in my head. And that idea of just sort of resolving and repairing memory, especially like repressed memory, and sort of, yeah, organizing those thoughts for childhood.
Do you think that artists in general use art to preserve memories, or is it a kind of way of creating what you would like to be the memory, or maybe distorting the memory?
I think that's subjective. I mean, initially before the camera existed, art was all about documenting. So for that case, memories. I feel like now still in some cases, it's used to like memorialize certain things. But I also think, it's a lens for me, at least through like, it's sort of sharing my lens with viewers. And I think hearing Jason talk, it's similar to him, like he's sharing his sort of experience with the shopping cart and his interpretation. I feel like, art is like a vessel through which, you share your perspective.
This is kind of like a tangent maybe to that question, but in creating what you're remembering, is there a sense of ethics involved in that? Because what if you're painting something, you're creating something that is maybe really hurtful, or in some way is not good for somebody else, but it's a memory that you have that as in the way that you think you remember it. Do you think that there's a sense of ethics involved in that, or something that could be hurtful to somebody that's featured as a part of that memory that you're putting out in art?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. But I think it's the same for people who write novels and poetry and songs, right? Like if you're writing about your experience, there's always that threat of it, I guess, hurting your audience in some way, or someone, interprets it in a hurtful way. And I would say, like, even for me, going through these memories, was like super emotional, in good and bad ways. Like, for example, like it humanized my mom in so many ways to me, just sort of going through the old videos and photos, and she was like 10 years younger than me when I was born, and just like thinking like how she had to apply herself as a mother and in motherhood, and I didn't have a cushy childhood by any means, but it was very colorful, and at the time it was magical. But now I'm looking back and I'm like, wow, she really did that thing. Yeah.
And your work also has a lot of images that they're layered images, or there's a lot of transparencies between the images, so it almost seems as though you're bringing together different scenes, but in this one image. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that was definitely the intention. So thank you. But yeah, that whole idea of like transcribing memory, for me at least, it's sort of like a double exposed and triple exposed photo in my mind, especially when you're sort of reconciling with certain memories and the overlap of memories. So yeah, a lot of them have this sort of ethereal, transparent, layered look. And yeah, definitely intentional, definitely sort of trying to get the physicality of those memories out on the canvas. Yeah.
And Jason, you incorporate a lot of natural references. I mean, your day job, if you want to call it that, is in construction. You work a lot with rocks and kind of.
Semi-retired now.
Oh, you're semi-retired, okay. But you work a lot with natural elements, and you can see some of that in the echoes of the work that you produce. So can you tell us more about that? Because there seems to be a little bit of, in that abstract influence, there's like some natural formations, and the coloring of it in terms of the gray kind of granite looking feel of it is really another like underlaying narrative for the shopping carts, just kind of contrast with that. So tell us more about how you come up with these concepts and the process of that.
For my abstract work and the bulk of how I, attack anything in the studio, even with doing the actual construction work where we would do faux rock work, you're still basing that on spending so much time out like referencing. Not so much getting photographs for reference or studying a specific thing, but actually being out so much out, seeing these formations that it just becomes a second nature to actually understand the rhythm of how like rock faces work. Most people go by, it's like, oh, look, it's a mountain. And we sit there and look at it day in, day in and out. The way you actually start seeing these really odd patterns, things that, in that business you shouldn't do, But when I get into the studio, it's not the overall picture that I get involved with. It starts to become the details of little areas and fixating on seeing a specific place over years. Like now I've seen certain things over 20 odd years. We've seen whole waterfalls change. We've seen, postcards are no longer the same in some of these areas because headlands have actually, fallen in, and that's just been in like 25 years. So it's watching those processes and getting to the details of it, and then interpreting that with both line and paint, texture, and surface, and kind of layers, and then removing layers, putting layers back on, just to try and understand that continuous process of just seeing, it's not just an erosion, but it's a buildup at the same time. This thing's eroding, that thing's building up over the years, and that's just by trying to interpret that.
That sounds like a metaphor for life. This process of removing, adding, and trying to interpret things. And through that all, as an artist, you have to have that patience. You have to be willing to experiment. But that, to me, represents this idea of having grit, like the stickability to do that. For the characteristics that you need to have as an artist, like this willingness to fail, this willingness to be like sometimes ambiguous, you kind of figure it out as the process is happening, sometimes what you end up with. Do you think that that's something that you are born with, or something that could be developed through your practice, through your art education, just through life experiences? And how does that manifest itself in the work that you do and the work that you see other artists doing?
I feel like it's sort of rooted in confidence in sort of your stroke and your gesture, but I mean, all of that is through practice, right? And through failing, and I guess not being so attached to the finished product. I don't keep a sketchbook, like the ideas exist in my head. Sorry, Miss Williams. And then I just go for it on the canvas. And a lot of my peers do that sort of trial and error in their sketchbook or on their iPad. But I definitely have like a raw approach to it. And something I learned with Jason in the studio when we were doing art collabs, like I thought I was super, like avant-garde with my no sketchbook, and he's even more so. I was like, we were looking at the work, and I'm like, should I add some red? He's like, yeah, add it. If we don't like it, we'll paint over it, or I'll sand it off the paper. And so definitely, like, he's very ballsy when it comes to like what he's gonna do to the paper. And I thought I was, but he definitely taught me a lot about that. And yeah, to return to how I started, it's confidence, right? And it's that like willingness to fail and that surety that, it don't be tied to this final product. And it could always keep becoming something else, especially with water-based paint. Like, it dries and 30 minutes later it could be something completely different.
Do you think you were born with that, or is it something that you developed over time?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, I guess I was a pretty like rambunctious child, but yeah, I always hated my sketchbook, so yeah, just let me get it to paint.
Stuck with that.
Yeah.
And Jason, what about you?
When everything's going well, I think I'm bored with it. But when the painting's on, I think it's easier for someone to expand their practice if they just innately have creative juices within themselves, but I by no means do I think you're just limited to being born. I definitely think it can be taught. Go back to the construction work. We have people that come out, I want to carve rock, and you don't teach them how to carve rock, you just start them, and they fail immediately. And you start telling them, don't do that today. The next day, don't do this, stop doing that. And eventually they'll start figuring it out. And then we've had people that all of a sudden have just flourished, So people can definitely be shown, and if you get to a point, then I think you almost kind of create it into yourself. So not necessarily born in, but I think you can actually maybe rebirth it into yourself that, hey, I can do this, I can be creative. And then from there, I think you'll see things differently. And from that point, then I think, you've got it. But I don't think the assumption is obviously I would have been bored with it because soon. But, there are times when I don't think that I have it.
And I don't know, just to I know I said it a few times, but I don't know if there's any failure in art, it can always be something else. And yeah, it's like a practice. I don't know if there's any failure, even if the piece looks terrible, it probably looks good to someone and it can then become something. And if you're thinking of it as a practice, you have bad days at practice when you're playing a sport, and it's just a bad day, and tomorrow's the next day, and you get at the canvas or get at a new piece, and it's the process.
Better.
Yeah, the process continues.
What do you think that you learned the most from each other in the process of creating these collaborative works? And how was it working together? I mean, we already discussed how you worked. The process of your work is different, but you ended up, having basically the same types of processes, even though the style is different. What was it like to work with each other and to produce these collaborative works, and what did you learn in that process?
I enjoyed it quite a bit because I had no idea what it was going to be. So there was no, how is this going to work? I know what I do. I can see Angelika's work. I have an idea of how it happens, but it doesn't mean, that doesn't mean you understand it. In the beginning, there's let's go, and we went. And then there's always that immediate pullback of, I don't want to step on somebody on her toes. So you kind of had a little bit of discussion about that, and both of us were, no, just go right over on top of whatever you want to do. And so you say that, and at the same time, it's well, I'm not painting over your little baby's face. So it was trying to, for me, what I learned was trying to understand what may or may not be more important to that person as far as their mark making and what needs to stay. Because in my case, I can be a destructive force and just paint over the entire thing at the end of the night. Let's start that again tomorrow. That has happened. That will happen. So it was learning to try to really step back and try to understand what is more important as far as what needs to be shown in its purity. This is her mark, this is my mark, this is where the marks kind of cross over. We're just trying to understand. And so it just took a lot longer to look at things. But at the same time, very easily and relaxed, mark making at the same time. I mean, it would just go and then it would sit and kind of look back and ease into it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely very similar. A lot of the making felt like a conversation, like a physical conversation. All 8 papers were on the wall at the same time, and we were sort of just getting at it at the same time.
Were you working on all 8 at the same time?
Yeah, they were all stapled on the wall. And we both sort of individually work like that. I'm never working on one piece. I work with very wet, watery paint. And I also have ADD. So something will be drying and I move on to the next thing, or a new idea will appear. And yeah, and Jason's very similar, once you're in the studio, you're not really keeping still unless you're taking a step back and looking. So yeah, we were just in tandem, just bouncing around the studio. And like you said, there was a physical step back. And then there were days that we would come in intervals, he would come in the morning, I would come in the afternoon, and then he'd come in the night, and I'd come back in the morning, and things are slightly different. And yeah, like I said, he definitely sort of reiterated to me or underscored that don't be so tied to the finished product while you're in the middle of the process. Yeah, he's very brave when it comes to his approach.
There's always the back side of the paper too that you could start it.
Yeah, there's options. How's your work in this show? How is it different from your previous work? And where do you see the evolution of it from your previous style?
Well, I had a show at Cab Gallery in April that sort of focused on this same theme, but throughout the process of that show, I think I landed where I wanted to be towards the end of the art making process. So I would say like the last 5 pieces I put in that show were like where I wanted them to be. So that gave me sort of like a diving board of where to start on this time. And I made a lot of the works before we started our collaborative pieces. Like I said, they were sort of the ribbon at the end. Yeah, and this art making process just felt very intimate. This time, unlike the previous shows, I was able to convert old family videos from like tapes to digital and be able to sort of see these images in motion for the first time. Obviously, like kids today have like their parents' phone videos and they're on like an SD card or something. But I had all these like tapes that had survived hurricanes that I was able to get sort of converted. And it allowed the work to, I guess, become slightly more ethereal because I was working from moving image rather than stills. Yeah, and I think I was able to sort of capture the essence of like, or the imagery of my memories slightly more in this body of work. Yeah.
For myself, the obvious addition of the very blatant shopping cart. Again, my work is normally all abstract. It's more abstracted actually, because there's quite a bit of actual references to things, you know, so it's not necessarily pure abstract art. And with that, I tell the story, you know, of decay and all these different things. And I am, you know, very much in with societal problems, natural problems, you know, where, you know, throughout the pieces, but that doesn't mean that it's easy to pick up on at all necessarily. So this one was kind of the first step into a very obvious symbol, which, you know, I completely just put in everything everywhere because it was, it's like, oh, wait, this works. Let me make it that obvious, but then you can still relate to my original style of work. I've now realized how to even alter that further to have the shopping cart still be the premise, but kind of take that silkscreen printed straightforward image out. So I'm actually already starting to work on how to manipulate the shopping cart a little bit so it's there, but it's not so prevalent. You're going to kind of have to work a little bit more for it.
So you explained the symbolism behind the shopping cart, but what made you actually choose the shopping cart now?
So that is, it's literally, so it's the first of a series of symbols. Like a propane tank is going to be another one, a simple, you've all seen them in black with yellow lid storage containers, you know, 20-gallon containers. This is, so while I'm traveling out, when we're going out hiking and surfing and whatnot, you know, if we're going all the way down to California, we're going to do a quick trip, you make stops at certain rest stops over and over. We've done them for work, and you see the same people. Like over the years, met some of these people, you're just there for the night, you know, 8 hours, whatever. And a lot of them have jobs, but they're stuck in the cars, or, you know, you relate to people with the shopping carts with that, but it's just dealing with the overall. I got it so easy with my journey and sitting there talking with people that have it just so completely hard, but you're just, you know, kind of having that discussion with them. So it was just realizing the overlapping symbols. I too have these storage crates. We do have the 5-gallon propane tank, but it means something so different. You know, my use of it and their use, you know, skip everything in the middle, you know, it was just to that, literally that extreme. And the cart just really seemed to be the most prevalent. Like here, you know, we got pocket, but you don't see the same thing here. You see people begging, you see people homeless, you see people struggling, but you don't necessarily see the cart the same way, whereas it is, I mean, you know, obviously not every single place, but when you go to certain areas, it is truly just scattered, like everywhere. So it was just kind of no getting away from it. And it's such a discussion, you know, in the media, where if you listen to certain stations, you would assume Seattle is burning down every day. It is not, but there is such a problem. And we're listening to people just kind of try to sweep it away. But these carts are everywhere, so you can't sweep it away. And so every time I would look at my shopping cart again, full to the brim. And you just kind of go back to thinking about all the other carts that you saw.
So there's a human component to your recognition of the consistency of the shopping cart. I mean, literally, but like also the symbolism for what it means, it represents the homelessness. Angelika, for you choosing the subject matter for your work, is it something that's a similar inspiration, like kind of you seeing these kind of symbols around you, or there's something that is kind of making that come to the forefront? Like, what is it that's happening that made you kind of move your work in this direction?
I'm turning 30 next week.
I'm
I'm
not sad for you.
Yeah, I think it's just this reconciliation with memory, and watching. I guess I don't really watch myself age because I'm living in this body, but like watching like my mother age and my family members age, and people who are featured in the work aren't around anymore, and just thinking about their lived experience and the version of them that I got. And also like that wasn't just my uncle, he was also like a really cool dude that apparently played the piano.
Oh, is he the one in the Speedos?
Yeah. No, that's my dad in the
Oh,
Speedos.
okay.
He's the one sitting on the beach with a cigarette in his hand. Yeah.
Everybody looked cool, and I was just like, wow,
Yeah,
this looks
like they were so
super
cool and stylish.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I had no idea because I'm like they were grown.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's my experience, but also like the experience of them that I don't quite remember. But it's I would have been there, I would have experienced it, but I don't quite remember. So yeah, I guess both of our works deal with like this level of sort of experience that we don't necessarily experience, and like a comparison of those two experiences.
I think it's interesting that you're kind of expressing this in a way like the human condition, but in these two very different ways. Even in the type of materials, right? Using a lot of watercolor and this kind of idea of kind of memory that's at the forefront, but it's still not quite something you can hold. And the watercolor paint kind of represents that.
Yeah, I paint with house paint, but I do try and make it look like watercolor.
Oh, it's actually house paint.
Yeah,
That's
it's all the
interesting.
paint that I use for my murals is what I use in the work.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because the appearance does not, it seems very like ethereal
Yeah.
in the style that you paint. And Jason, you kind of translated that in something that's this kind of ubiquitous commodity item like the shopping cart, but it's also like hard, right? It's either hard aluminum or it's whatever it is, the metal, or it's plastic. But it's interesting that they kind of come together because the style of it is like very harsh versus this kind of like very fluid lines. You're using something that seems like you can't hold it in your hand.
Yeah, and I feel like when you guys are able to walk through the show and you see our collaborative works, the way, and I guess it's sort of like a tangible version of what we were doing in the studio. It's almost like a dance between these two sort of types of imagery. The shopping cart is prevalent in some of our collaborations, and in some it sort of takes a background step. In some it almost weaves its way through the images of people. And I feel like, I guess that sort of juxtapiposition, I'm trying to avoid using that word, but it shows and it's like reconciled in our collaborative works.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, like I say, ethereal. When I first saw one of the pieces months ago, that was the first thing I said. It was like the background is amazing, the way the figures are so ethereal in front of it, or within it, they become part of the background. And I think it was such a contrast with my work. And it might have something to do also with her memories, and what she's talking about is from within, whereas everything I'm doing is as an observer. So it is kind of, it's not analytical, but it is just observational.
Right.
I'm not making a judgment on one way or the other. It's just, this is what I'm seeing, this is what it is, and then bringing it in. But it is interesting how the much more opaque, thick, whatever.
It's two different types of storytelling. One is more factual and one is more kind of subjective.
Yeah.
You want to look at it like that. I think that's a very interesting contrast. So one of the talks that I did last year on the creative ego was kind of discussing this idea of how do you deal with success and failure and kind of like that space in between where you're just like, you know, what do I do next after this great upset or this great victory? So going back to the theme of this kind of true grit and the way that you approach your work and the processes that you use, how do you deal with that, right? So Jason, you described your process as like, you layer a lot, you add, you remove, you flip the page over, worst comes to worst, or you completely scrap it and start all over again the next day. And Angelika, you go in with the concept without having, you know, an idea of the end. How do you think about your processes in this kind of like the concept of this creative ego, and like what do you do in between your successes and your failures?
I don't have a full answer to that, but I want to piggyback off something Jason said earlier. Like, if the painting's going too well, it's boring. You know, it's in terms of like the process. Even with a deadline looming, it gets boring. You know, like if it's just very streamlined, you know, it's boring. If you're a dancer, you know how to do the cha-cha slide. That's boring, right? And I think what I witnessed Jason and I both doing in our collaborative works, but I know we both do it separately, is almost like creating challenges in the work. Like, you know, I'll do a splash of like red spray paint and it might work with the end result, or I might have to like work around it or work through it. And it's, I don't know, that makes it fun, it makes it interesting. You know, I'll leave the painting and I'll go to bed and I'll be thinking about all the options that I can go and hit this canvas with the next time I get to go to the studio. So yeah, I don't know if that quite answered your question.
But it's in some way, let me see if I can like kind of translate it, or not translate it, but like what I'm gathering from what you said is that in the way that you deal with if something goes really, really well or doesn't go really, really well, I mean, there's an ego involved in everything that you put out as an artist or just as a person, right? Anything you create and you put out there that can be critiqued by someone else, there's a certain level of ego involved, whether you're confident in it or not. But in that area where you either had like this great success or the great failure, it sounds to me like what you do is you kind of think through how can you make this thing different or better, you know, after you experiment.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I guess that's correct. In terms of these works, so like what I do outside of my studio practice is that I'm a muralist, so I'm constantly doing sort of like client-led work or client-commissioned work. And so the objective with these pieces, and I guess success and failure is subjective if it's, you know, my own work. But the objective with these pieces were to make very personal pieces. I felt like I needed to like reclaim my art practice in a way, and to just, I guess, get these memories on canvas in a way that felt authentic to my thoughts and my experience were the success there. Yeah, but I feel like I deal with, I guess, that idea of failure more when it's like there's clients involved and there's like eyes watching, for sure. Yeah. So I don't know, I guess the studio space is like more ego stripped than the mural space for me.
Oh, that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
This was like a real internal process when you're in the studio.
Yeah, I feel like it's, you know, the one time of like my art making that belongs to me, because so much of it belongs to, you know, the people that commission the work from me.
So it's kind of your nurturing space in between.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And Jason?
I finally got my ego in check 3.5 years ago
3.5, okay.
in the studio when I finally realized that to get out of the idea of getting upset, like, you know, not rage obviously, but like really getting it, oh, this slam brush down, oh, this is terrible, blah, 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 pout off, whatever be it. And realizing that you were never meant to make great art every single time. And so, you know, previously when you have kind of not a full roller coaster, but a little bit of, oh, things are going great, that's great, and, just going through all that to where now, no, I don't like the work necessarily that I'm doing on the wall, but it's okay, it will happen. And so I don't have the anger with it or the level of frustration, but I've come to be able to see this isn't working. So put it up on the shelf for now. Continue on with something else. Okay, now that's working. Okay, great, we're back on that. And then bring this other one back. So at no point do I just give up on the piece. There is I've lost the relationship with the individual piece, having conflict with it. Now I know at some point that is going to come back, it's going to hit the wall, and it will get resolved. Maybe not anything to do with the style it was in at that moment, which I would have at that point learned something, and didn't go down that road again. But I'm now finally to that point where it will work out. It just might not be today, but I don't get. Yeah, I mean you're upset. It's like, wow, I just wasted some pain. But other than that, emotionally, I don't get wound up about it anymore, even though I'm not happy with it. And then you can just kind of continue on, and eventually it will get to where it's like, yeah, no, that I'm willing to show.
So that space where you are creating and you're not thinking about, let's say refining a piece or making something for a client, in that space is where you put your ego in check and you kind of rebuild yourself to go from the peak or the valley, right? So here's like the neutral area.
And then there are moments. I try to stay within that. I acknowledge what's happening here. I just don't let it affect. Like I'm not painting for a few days. No, you're going to continue to paint even though you're done. You're just going to figure out what was happening, what physically on that work was causing this, and you better get it back to here. This is obviously the stuff that seems to be more well received when it's working out. And if you do go in the studio and you do that within the first 3 hours, you better put that one away too.
Yeah.
And leave it and learn to be like, yep, you don't have to keep touching it. Sometimes it is that good. It worked out. Like, hey, to learn to trust just what you see and to trust your judgment on it, I guess, is the deal. Otherwise, you bring pieces down, Avery says, no, that's the one that looks good. It's like, no, that's not the one. But learn again, so that would have been the moment, 3.5 years ago, finding that you just have to keep going, you have to keep going, you have to keep going. Accept that you will or will not like it, but just keep going. And I think that is when I realized that the ego, me and the artist is out of it, and it just makes the work better for myself.
So it sounds like what you're saying is the grit is what keeps your ego in check.
You got to trust the way it is.
Yeah.
Just trust what's actually coming out.
That's the grit. Okay, this is super interesting. I want to open the floor up to any questions from the audience, and you can see we have two very engaged and plugged in artists. So any questions that you have, and maybe anything that we spoke about or anything that you're thinking about at this time? Don't be shy. We're all friends here. You're in a safe space.
Yeah, somebody.
It's your time.
We all want to hear you.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
What would you say are like your both? Hang on, I haven't yet. What are your favorite and least favorite parts of creating art, or the art that you put out into the world?
I guess for me, like with the client commissioned work, it's like if the client's happy, that's my favorite part. And I guess the ego battles that Royann had mentioned are my least favorite part. I feel like there's this pressure that comes with like mural painting, especially because it's like my studio is very private, but I'm exposed when I'm painting murals. So I definitely feel like that's my least favorite part. But in the studio, I think my favorite part is the privacy and the intimacy, especially because, and there's like a reclamation, like that belongs to me, that practice belongs to me, and I would say that's my favorite part. And my least favorite part of that is the isolation. You know, I feel like ICE has a pretty good program going where like there's a bunch of studios in one space and they're able to like have these discussions with one another and, you know, do mini crits or, you know, ask opinions. And I would say definitely working in isolation as an artist would be my least favorite part. But I mean, obviously, like I'll WhatsApp my friends photos of the work and be like, what are your thoughts? I'm at a speakerphone. But yeah, the isolation for me.
My favorite part would be the moment that I realized, oh, I got something inspired me to go do something right now. It may be out in the middle of somewhere. It may be in the studio when it hits, you know, because there's a lot of time when you walk into the studio and you're just kind of fussing around and moving stuff around. It's like, okay, we're getting ready to do it. And you're just sitting there looking at it. You're still getting ready. In a couple hours, you're still getting ready. Nothing's out. You know, change the music. Still getting ready. But when that moment comes where it's like, I got it, and I'm about to make that first action, that might happen out in the, you know, it might be in the woods, it might be surfing, it might be right in the studio, but that's my favorite moment because you can tell, you can really tell like who I got it. I got that might be seeing other people's artwork, you know, going places like that. Now I'm inspired to go do something, and you just feel it. My least favorite is knowing when to stop, when it's done. So there's a lot of conflict. I am isolated where we are because we live out at the edge of the woods. And my wife is generally the one person in the studio on the regular. And so, you know, she comes in every now and then and like, boy, you should probably stop that right there. And it's hard dealing with that because, no, it's not done. That's not it. That's not the idea. And so it's just that. Is it really done? Am I making a mistake if I go further? You know, which is 80% of the time I make the mistake and go further. And then you look back at the pitch. That was better 2 days ago, but you know, that's another thing. For me, that's the worst, is trying to just to know right when it's like, oh, it's there, step away to another one.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. You've got a microphone coming your way.
Hi.
Hi.
I haven't fully observed Angelika's work in progress, but I've seen it in the end stage. I've actually seen Jason work as he's creating his, I would say, controlled chaos. What I've seen is Angelika has more of a harmony, and like I said, Jason has more of a chaos where he controls what he does and how he does it, but also layers upon it. How has your individual styles connected into sort of a happy medium where you can say, hey, this is telling a story, but also it sort of blends in itself to say two different things while also creating one harmonious piece?
Are you talking about the collaborative pieces?
Yes.
Okay. I would say we both layer. I think something I asked Jason in those last 2 days of making the work, I was like, okay, Jason, I'm gonna stop now. And you know, like, because usually when I paint, I stop at a certain point. He's like, no, Adam, just keep going.
Okay. Jason's wife needs to come in.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, but me personally, usually I stop at a certain point. So, yeah, but I would say we both do like a whole lot of layers. I think for me, the layers are super important. I'll spend just as much time on the background as the foreground and try and like mesh those layers to give that sort of ethereal, sort of double exposed, I guess, look. So yeah, I feel like that really worked for our collaboration because we were just like on it, like the paper was still wet and it was like, okay, slap another layer. And I'm there painting with like liquid acrylic paint and he's grabbing like a 6B pencil to like then like scorch some things on the paper. And then the next day I came with some house paint and put some figures and then he's coming with oil pastels and it was just like, just all these layers. And I feel like we found some harmony in that. And I think the end of our collaborative pieces don't necessarily tell a narrative that joins the shopping cart, and that particular narrative with my memories, it tells a narrative separately, but I think physically and material wise, like you'll see that there is a lot of harmony between that in the pieces. But yeah, I think like we sort of discussed, the source of the content and subject matter is very disparate, but I feel like physically and material wise, we were able to find some sort of harmony.
I think for me, it's just starting to look at figurative work in a different way, like maybe trying to figure out how to interpret that into my work, not obviously a complete stylistic change, but somehow maybe bringing that in, the shopping cart was one step, and then seeing the way where Mark's work, where it was, just trying to interpret maybe some version of that to tell a little bit more of the story within my pieces. I think that would have been one of the things I've learned. When I look at the collaborative pieces, it's interesting. You see a lot of things where people collaborate. You truly see both styles, but it doesn't look like one or the other's dominant. It actually, they really somehow look like a really even kind of meshing, which I was worried about mine. I go, oh,
Me too. I was like, he's gonna paint over everything. But no, I think we found a great balance, and I think in that sort of balance of like not taking over one another, there were certain things like I painted a yellow pool, and then the next day Jason painted it white and put navy blue polka dots, and I was like, my pool was yellow. But then I went in with like a yellow oil pastel, and the pool still technically reads as yellow, and I was like, but that was so cool that he went over and did that, and it like, that same ego that you're talking about, like I took my ego or like the finite work that I envisioned in my head, and like it's better than anything I could have created on my own, because you put these like, I guess like when I wanted to create this body of work, I had it like in this box of sorts, and he like opened that box and like threw navy blue polka dots inside, and I was like, yeah, we're doing this.
So it's funny, just hearing you speak about the way that you created the work, like you would have multiple pieces of paper up at the same time and be working on them at the same time. It's sort of like a dance. And when I think about it, it sounds to me like the way that jazz works. So what kind of music were you listening to? I listen to music while I'm working. Like, what kind of music were you listening to kind of like, or did you listen to music? Did it facilitate the process of this kind of like back and forth? And whose playlist was it?
It was Jason's, and it wasn't English, but it was great. I don't know what language it was.
I will now introduce you all to the greatest DJs in the world. Now, a lot of it was my favorite DJs out of New York. It's Chances with Wolves. So go look up chanceswithwolves.com. I'm dead serious. They're the best.
Okay, note to self.
And I'm serious. They do 2-hour sets, every week or two. But for painting, you got to admit, it's just random stuff. It could be literally a Filipino band in the Philippines doing a brass version of Michael Jackson's Beat It. And they get away with it. It's all free because it's not necessarily the original artist. So it's all these, and so it's here and then it's there. And so it makes no sense the direction it's going. And so when you're painting like that, no one, I've listened to tons, I don't even know what's coming up, And so it allows you to you're hearing music, wow, this is interesting, that sounds familiar. But it allows you to just kind of keep doing what you were doing. You guys did that.
Yeah,
or say pick whatever you want.
He did, but I'm more of like a dance hall person when I'm in the studio, and I was like, I can't subject Jason to this or echo in general. But yeah, so like but all of my work, like I've been talking about, is tied up in memory, and for me, like that chapter of like not working in my studio, working with not my playlist. Like I walked into Echo today, and like even the smell in here, I was like, oh, this smells like my week in the studio with Jason. Like it's all very like nostalgic, and like it's a chapter of my life, and yeah, it was awesome.
I think you're gonna call it your week without dance hall.
Yeah, my week without dance hall. It was a purge for sure.
Any other questions?
We had a question in the back before.
I'll put you on next time.
I hope I didn't miss it. he answered the question, but when I heard Royann ask if you were born with this artistic ability. But in that, when did you start artistry and how did you know and when did you know that, oh, art is going to be my thing?
When did you start?
This one's easy.
In the womb.
Right. Right, it was the earliest picture, I'm like, months, oh, a year? 22 months in the diapers. Black and white photo. And unfortunately, the work looks a lot like that again now. So, which is good, because I've come back to that purity. So with my mother, Sue Bennett Williams, the art teacher, everyone.
A legend.
I was,
Yeah.
exactly. I was exposed literally from that point. So, and we were talking about this with somebody the other day, where since I could remember, you went somewhere, you went on a trip, you went to the museum, you went to a gallery, you went over here, you went to a museum, you went to a gallery. It was during Transforming Spaces, when it was a schoolmate that I hadn't seen in 20 odd years. It's like, I didn't realize there were all these galleries here. And I'm like, how would you not, because the first thing I did, whenever we go, so where's the museum? Where's the gallery? And so you automatically learn so much history and culture of wherever you may be. So for me, it was from then. And so having access to art, obviously you learn, I had the jump start on, actual regular drawing classes, basically. Although, as she will quickly tell you, no, I never listened to her, and my art teacher in school knew better, which I did do that. But when did I know when it was really? Oh, I probably mid-teens. It was like, yeah, this is really what I want to do. And then that faltered. Reality set in. It's like I have some bills that I need to pay. So I did this other stuff, which was creative also. Ironically, friends like, yeah, this is actually pretty good. But yeah, I'd say teens was when it really was like this. I am going to at some point do this.
I guess similarly to Jason, so when I was also in diapers, I was Miss Williams, Sue Bennett Williams' neighbor, and my mom worked full time, and Sue would be like, yeah, bring the baby over. And she taught after school art classes. And I would be there in my diapers, and she took me into her class. I think I was about 4 years old when I started her classes. And she was my only art teacher because in school, my whole life I was like, I'm gonna be a doctor. I left high school, full scholarship to go do medicine. And I came back that first summer after doing pre-med, and I was like, went to Miss Williams and I was like, I don't wanna do this. I wanna do art, and my mom's gonna kill me. And she was like, no, you'll be fine. Just do it and you'll be fine. Yeah, and so I just did it. I left pre-med and got into UB where she was my teacher again, worked at the National Art Gallery, and eventually went off and did art history. And now I'm here with Jason, very full circle moment for me. So most of the memories that are sort of on these photos, I would have known Miss Williams at the time. So like, yeah, very sentimental show for me. Yeah. I'm gonna not cry now.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I just found a picture not too long ago that showed that when, from the stables when you were.
Yeah. So thanks, Miss Williams, because I would have been still in my residency program.
We have a question from YouTube. This is from Vivante. This is directed to Angelika. A lot about tussling with memory and returning to childhood. How does this inform your great perseverance practice and even your acceptance practice?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'll start with the back end of that question, acceptance. Like I mentioned earlier, like a lot of this process and seeing the moving imagery of myself as a small child and my mom, there was just a lot of humanizing of myself and my mom, and a lot of my friends and family now have babies, and I'm always like, wow, this little thing is gonna become a big thing. And then I see these videos of my super youthful mom and me as a child, and her just speaking so much life into me as a baby. And so, yeah, a lot of acceptance of who I am now, I guess. Cavante would do this. Yeah, and I guess that's all about perseverance and grit, right? Yeah, I'm gonna put a full stop on that.
That's a really good question. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I'm always amazed at the questions that come from the audience. Wow.
Yeah, I'll be messaging her about that.
I think so. You have a question? Okay.
So my question is, how do you make sure you aren't being too precious about the work you're making? And how do you pivot when you start to realize that you're trying to shoehorn a concept?
Okay, I'm gonna try gather myself. Here you
Getting precious with, I don't necessarily get precious with an entire painting or even a concept, but you do get caught up getting precious with areas. And they're being taped off, and oh, you're covering it. Oh, this one little section is perfect. It's perfect. And I'll say 95% of the time, it ends in a very quick failure because you have choked everything else off in my particular style and the way I work. And it chokes everything else off, and then nothing becomes natural. Like your brushstroke literally stops because we don't want to get anything on this one little area because this one little thing looks great, And you've changed everything, and then you can really see like, wow, this isn't working. Then comes anger, and then you end up painting right over the little precious area and getting over it. And sometimes you try to sand a little bit of it back, but you just really can't hold on to it. It will destroy, for me, it will destroy the painting every single time if I get caught up in something. Because it happens, it's like, wow, that looks great. And at that point, you should probably just step away and go like, hey, maybe that's just it. Maybe that was it. And that was the whole thing that might carry the entire piece. Because if you just try to hold on to it, it just slides down. You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm back, guys. Yeah, so I would say similar for me. Miss Williams, his mom, definitely taught us like not to tie ourselves to the work. I watched her throw people's work in garbage at COB. But for the good cause, like we all learned great lessons through that. Yeah, I'm notorious for like painting over a painting that other people like. If it doesn't sit well with me, it can't stay.
And again, that's specifically, I'm saying that's for me. Some other processes you can see it is necessary. This is working to expand off of that. So that doesn't help the answer, but just saying directly from my particular style or anybody working that way, it definitely holds you back.
Yeah, when we were doing our collaborative pieces, and we were at like the second to last day, Jason would walk through and be like, I love this little 3-inch square right here. Let's save this. And then I came back the next day and half of them were gone. But yeah, he did definitely try and preserve little areas, and it's so funny. He gets like kind of passionate and excited about little things. Like he talked to me about barnacles for 30 minutes. And that same sort of light in his eye came up with the little corners of the work or little patches. He's like, I really like the texture here. Yeah, and we would try to preserve or highlight those areas, and then some got obliterated.
Barnacles.
Yeah, he loves a barnacle.
Barnacles are very real things. It's like the car. It's
This is going to be a full-blown discussion right now.
They're everywhere. Like how many things other than water are everywhere in the world that connects everybody? Like you could live somewhere in the cold, you could live somewhere, barnacles, they're ships, they literally go everywhere. They're destructive. Everyone hates them. We can scrape them off the boat, but they're cleaning the ocean.
You do use a lot of barnacles.
I'm telling you, no, it's in everything because you see them everywhere. They do so much, like especially in our area, for literally cleaning the water cycle. Like the water in Puget Sound cleans out every 6 months. Yeah, I don't know, it's tricky. But then if you're surfing and you fall on them, you're cut to home. Yeah, So it's a love-hate with watching them and how tough they are, And at the same time, they can watch them take pounding 30-foot waves, and then you can still go over there and then still just yank it out, So they become AMMs, and so like, there's a lot of staring at a lot of things within the details. Sometimes you don't really necessarily see it until you realize what that thing is, and then you maybe go out and see these things in the same light. It's like, okay, I see what this is. you
Because
know?
now that you say it, I realize that I've seen barnacles in your work for a while. Interesting. Barnacles, everybody, on a Friday. Maybe we have time for one more question? Yes, ma'am.
So, just as an observer, and not really understanding the backstory, there was like this synergy, when you all were discussing the collaboration, and I was like, I wonder why was that, right? So thank you for giving us the
Yeah.
backstory.
You're welcome.
The question is, are there plans to do more collaborative work in the future?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We discovered that right away. And then now that we've seen it, I mean, I've done collaborative work with my mother. A few other people I've played with up in Seattle, but this was by far the most free and interesting one, where I was the most pleased with the way the work came together so quickly. So,
Yeah, we did like 4 days. We got those pieces done in 4 days and like 4 half days. They just flew. But yeah, I'm going to go up to Seattle next year, spend some time with Jason, go observe some barnacles in Seattle and make some work.
Right?
Yeah, we're going to surf and we won't get cut. Yeah.
I just want to, please, if you could just play the dance hall
No, I can't.
in
do
Seattle.
that.
I just want to see what comes out of that. Dance hall, Seattle weather, and barnacles.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a collaboration.
that's a real collab.
After I put him on the spot, he was like, I like that.
Yeah, no pressure. You
I
guys
just
know
don't
now.
think I just don't think to put it in, when I'm in the studio.
Oh, great
It's
work.
just weird, I just
on
leave
that.
it the game.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not joking. Just play the dance hall.
I'm gonna play the dance hall.
So, I think this is a great way to end this. Dance hall, barnacles, and collaboration. And grit.
And great, and other things.
And other things. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank Angelika and Jason for an amazing conversation, interesting. We learned about barnacles. I mean, I really enjoyed it. You cried, you laughed, you cried. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. Thanks again for coming out, and do remember to take a look at their show. It's just over there. Thank you to the current team. Great show, great setup, great conference. And have a good evening, everybody.
Something and didn't turn off. He wasn't gonna shut up, he was talking about barnacles all night. He was talking to us about barnacles, no. But honestly, at the end of our conversation, engineers, like.
I spent a lot of time trying to distill. The only animals on the planet that have to pay to eat it. So that distills for all the crops. That's the source of everything. You see what I mean? Go through any of the, it'll take it back to that. So it's That's just one of those features and things that becomes a part.
Wait, so.
I should get a water.
It's like
Now.
I'll get one.
Thanks for the water, it's right now.
It's just.
I'm so confused.